Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to you from around the world. Thank you for joining us today at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update. We are on day 72 of the war of Israel against the Palestinian terrorists in the Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria. We've had some substantial updates over the last few days, and so we'll run quickly through them, going to the different areas of fighting and giving those relevant updates from each situation. Probably the most important update was from yesterday, where IDF forces working in Sajadiya, operating in Sajadiya, just to the north of Gaza City, were unfortunately involved in an incident in which 3 of the Israeli hostages were killed. They were presumed to be terrorists that were being used as bait to hook the IDF soldiers and to draw them in to a terror zone. And unfortunately, the sad result was that the hostages were unfortunately killed and by the IDF, by friendly forces, by friendly fire. And so we have that major update, which is really going to be the basis for the conversation that we're going to have today with our veteran Arab Affairs correspondent and JCPA fellow, Yoni Ben Menachem. Aside from that incident, in Gaza, the fighting continues on, with today IDF forces really getting a tremendous breakthrough in Khan Yunis. They're taking over one of the main squares of Khan Yunis and getting to the officers of the head of the Hamas division for Khan Yunis, obviously a senior Hamas operative in the town of Khan Yunis. On the other fronts, we've seen the terrorists continuing to fire rockets. On Friday evening, just as Shabbat came in, there was a salvo of rockets fired towards Jerusalem, Mevaseret, Bet Shemesh, all deep within Israel's heartland, and really showing that the terrorists still have that ability to fire long-range rockets targeting most of Israel's civilian population. In Judea and Samaria, the anti-terror operations continue on, with dozens of terrorists really being arrested, others being killed. And just today, we saw another shooting attack coming out of Hebron. The details on that are still not entirely clear. On our northern front, on the border with Lebanon, we've seen also continued fighting, with Hezbollah shooting not only anti-tank rockets, also rockets themselves and UAVs, and a soldier being killed on our northern front over the weekend. The fighting has also continued on from the southern areas, from the Houthis in Yemen, who have continued to threaten all of the freedom of passage in the Red Sea, and from Bab el-Manda, from the Straits of Tiran, going up towards the Suez Canal. And today, another substantial shipping company announcing that they would no longer be using the Red Sea as part of their shipping routes, obviously under the threats of the Houthis attacking them and taking over their vessels. So based on that update, there's nothing new going on on the Israeli scene. The prayers on Friday at the Temple Mount continued on without incident. So and we can go really quickly on to Yoni Ben Menachem to discuss the subject of what exactly is now Hamas demanding in order to even start discussions about freeing more hostages. Obviously, the pressure of the weekend, the incident of the weekend, brought a lot more pressure on Israel's government to move forward with some type of a deal, some type of a modality to release some of the hostages or more of the hostages. We saw just a few weeks ago 110 of the hostages being released, but there are still now, even after the 3 hostages were killed on Saturday, on Shabbat, there are still 129 hostages being held by Hamas and the other terrorist organizations. And so the question is, what can the Israeli government do? What does Hamas want? What can the Israeli government do? Yoni, give us an update on on Hamas, I understand there are new demands even from Hamas on this subject.
Yes, well, what Israel can do is to put an offer on the table for Hamas through the mediators, through Qatar, through Egypt. But I don't think it will help because I think that Hamas now fully understands the extent of the Israeli infiltration into Gaza Strip, and they see the Israeli achievements, and they understand that they are running out of time. After the halt or the ceasefire that was 2 weeks ago, Israel invaded the Khan Yunis area and went down with a lot of forces to the south with the commando division. And Hamas now sees the achievement, and they understand that Israel is approaching the military leadership of Hamas, headed by Yahya Sinwar, by Mohammed Deif, Marwan Issa, his deputy. They are hiding in Hamas, in Khan Yunis area, according to the Israeli intelligence. So they understand that it's only a matter of time that the IDF will reach them and kill them. So they want to survive. They want to survive personally, and also they want to somehow save the Hamas rule in Gaza Strip. So what do? They try to blackmail Israel, demanding that Israel will agree for a full ceasefire, which means the end of the war, withdraw to the international border, release 5,000 terrorists from Israeli prisons, among them 400 murderers, and also give a commitment to the international community that it will lift the siege that was imposed on Gaza Strip until October the 7th, and also agree to build up a port in Gaza. These are a series of demands that I think that there isn't any government in Israel that can agree for such a blackmail, and they think that they can blackmail Israel because now it's the final stage of apparently the campaign, the military campaign of Israel, and also there's still a group, as you mentioned, 129 hostages being held, and they refuse to release them unless their demands are met.
Thank you, Yoni. That I understand is really the picture. And now, from what I understand, from what you said and from what I've also read before, the picture now that Hamas is saying is not only that they want to free all of the hostages, but really the preceding demand of Hamas is a complete ceasefire. And as you said, that means an end to the war, and only then to start discussing what will happen with hostages and a possible release of the hostages. So where do you see this going from Hamas's point of view and also from the point of view of the Israeli government?
Hamas' point of view is that they refuse to any mediation. There are, of course, attempts to mediate for another deal, but I don't think they will respond positively. And as for Israel, as far as Israel is concerned, Israel will increase the military pressure. And I think that what the Israeli army should do is send some of its forces in the south of Gaza to Rafah area, to the Philadelphia corridor, which is on the border between Gaza Strip and Egypt. This is a very important corridor of a few kilometers, which underneath it there are dozens of tunnels that are used to smuggle weapons from Egypt to Gaza Strip to Hamas. And I think that the Israeli army should take control over this area in order to prevent the escape of the Hamas terrorists from Gaza Strip to Egypt through these tunnels. And I think this would be a good leverage on Hamas. Let's hope that the Israeli army will do that. But in any case, the intention of of the Israeli army, as the political echelon said last night. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense Gallant, that the military operation will continue in full force in order to put Hamas in the corner. And I think once they will be really in the corner, they might agree for another small exchange of prisoners. This is what Israel hopes.
This is something that that I understand, Yoni, is really a fundamental for Hamas. They are looking to survive. They're looking to survive the war and to continue in their capacity of some type of a leadership within the Palestinian arena. Do you think that this is something which Israel is going to allow? That Hamas really is trying to release terrorists as a way to curry favor with the Palestinian people. That's looking obviously forward to say, well, I intend to continue on this scene, and therefore I'm really fortifying my position. Do you think that this is something that Israel is going to be able to live with? Hamas surviving through the end of the war, and not only surviving, but also resuming some type of leadership role?
Definitely not. We made all these sacrifices of thousands, more than 1,000 civilians and soldiers, and the number is increasing because the fighting goes on. We didn't do that in order to surrender to Hamas. This is out of the question. What Hamas is actually asking Israel, and this has regional implications also, what they're asking Israel is to contain the horrible massacre that they did on October 7 when they murdered and kidnapped 1,200 Israelis, to contain it, and agreed to leave Hamas leadership in its position as the leader or the ruler of the Gaza Strip. This is out of the question. This is, if this will happen, Israel will be giving a message of weakness to all of the Middle East. And what will such an agreement, such an approval by Israel to Hamas demands will be a green light for further massacres of Israelis, of Jews, soldiers and civilians. This is out of the question. There's no other way but to eliminate Hamas completely. All the military leadership, all the military infrastructure. Israel cannot live on the border with Gaza when there is such a big threat from a dangerous Islamic extremist element, which is on the border of Israel in the south.
How would you respond, Yoni, in that case to the very loud and very vociferous calls from Israelis within Israeli society to the Israeli government, who are calling for both a ceasefire and to promote a deal for the release of the prisoners? Just last night, we saw hundreds of people taking to the streets in Tel Aviv. Do they not understand exactly what you've just explained, that would be literally suicide?
I think they understand that, but we have to understand. We, as the Israeli people, we have to understand the horrible pain of the families of the abductees, of the Israeli abductees. We cannot criticize them when in their grief. We cannot do that. We have to understand in what position they are. But you should, the leaders of Israel should look at the interest of the whole Israeli people, not only of the abductees. And this is a very, very complicated situation. You have to handle it with care, with great care, and try to achieve both goals: to release the abductees and also to keep the security of Israel and eradicate Hamas completely. These are the two major tasks of the Israeli government, of the Israeli leadership. So I would not criticize now the families of the abductees and the supporters, maybe a few hundreds, maybe more, but the majority of the Israeli people, there is a consensus on the Israeli street that we must eradicate Hamas completely. Actually, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu today in the cabinet meeting he read a letter from families of the soldiers who were killed in the war, asking him not to stop, to continue fighting and eliminate Hamas in Gaza.
That Yoni, is, I think, one of the really the crux of this idea. It's that difficulty of the Israeli political echelon, of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Gallant on the one hand, to try and fulfill that dual position of, on the one hand, ensuring the safe return as far as possible of all of the hostages, but on the other hand, ensuring that the price paid for the release of the hostages doesn't later endanger possibly tens and thousands of people. We saw many of the terrorists released in the deal to free Gilad Shalit, which was carried out by Prime Minister Netanyahu in October 2011. Many of those terrorists then went to Gaza and were an integral part of the massacre itself, starting with Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza at the moment, other people like Ali Kaadi, who had been convicted for murder of Sasson Nuriel in 2005, sentenced to life, and then released as part of the deal. He was one of the company commanders of the Nukhba forces for the central area. These are things which we're seeing all the time. So really trying to make that balance between destroying Hamas as part of one of the goals of the war, releasing the hostages as one of the other goals of the war, and at the same time ensuring that that same message of deterrence is given over not only to Hamas, but also to Hezbollah in the north, and really that Israel maintains that ability to keep on fighting against the terrorists without endangering people. Some of the terrorists that Hamas is asking now to release, I know personally. People like Abdallah Barghouti. What I mean, I know personally. I stood in court with them when they were sentenced to prison sentences. Abdallah Barghouti, for those unfamiliar with the name, is a terrorist responsible for multiple suicide bombers and bombing attacks. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 67 consecutive life sentences. His right-hand man, Ibrahim Hamed, 54 life sentences. Hassan Salameh, 44 life sentences. We're talking about archi-terrorists. What would the influence of the release of those terrorists be for Hamas, Yoni?
Well, this will be a big boost to Hamas. This will improve its terror capabilities. And we can anticipate a wave of terrorism. We're already seeing that Hamas is shifting for the first time since its establishment in 1987. Now they're shifting to commit terror attacks abroad, which is a change in the policy as a result of the war. As you know, the Israeli Mossad and Shin Bet, they helped the Denmark police to arrest some Hamas activists last week who were planning terror attacks at the Jewish and Israeli targets in Denmark. And also in Switzerland, in Germany. So a release of such archi-terrorists will only promote the capabilities, the terror capabilities of the Hamas organization. But it's not only Hamas improving its power by the release of these archi-terrorists. There are also regional ramifications because everybody now is looking at Israel, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, the terrorist groups in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. They are looking at Israel, whether they're waiting to see if Israel is going to yield, to surrender to Hamas demands, or that it will be determined to eradicate Hamas. And if Israel will agree for such a demand of Hamas, this will weaken it. This will be a big sign of weakness that will invite more terror attacks on Israel. This is very dangerous.
That's something, obviously, which would be very, very problematic. You mentioned before, Yoni, that one of the pieces of advice that you would give to the Israeli, both political echelon and military echelon, is that we should immediately take the Philadelphia corridor. That's the strip of land, for those that don't know. It's a strip of land inside the Gaza Strip, adjacent to the Egyptian border. It's an area of land that Israel controlled for a very long time and was to a great extent responsible for preventing any type of movement underneath the border to a relatively good success rate. Now there are many tunnels underneath that area leading from Egypt to into Gaza and from Gaza back out. Yoni, do you see a real chance of the Hamas terrorists escaping into Gaza, into Egypt?
Into Egypt from Gaza. Yes, I think once the Israeli military pressure in Khan Yunis area, and especially on this area where the IDF thinks the military leadership of Hamas is hiding, once the military pressure on this area will increase, I think they will try to escape. I think that Yahya Sinwar is not dumb. He prepared a contingency plan before he made the attack, the massacre in October 7. He made a contingency plan. Also, Muhammad Def, and they have a secret plan how to escape from the Israeli army, which includes also going through tunnels under the border with Egypt and join the ISIS forces in Sinai. As I know, as I learned, Yahya Sinwar has a few relatives from Gaza who were in the military wing of Hamas, and a few years ago they defected and escaped to Sinai and joined the ranks of ISIS. So I think that he's considering this possibility. And there was also some statement last week of a senior Hamas official in Lebanon that said that we do not exclude the possibility that we will also be in Sinai. He said
that's unbelievable, Yoni. So what you're saying is that we're going to be in a situation where, as Israel pushes further south into Khan Yunis, into Rafah, we could see a situation where not only the Hamas leaders escape into the Sinai Peninsula, but also the possibility of them taking hostages with them. That could be a tremendously disastrous situation.
Yes, just to complete what I started to say, this guy, the senior of Hamas official in Lebanon, Usama Hamdan, his name, he said, we do not exclude the possibility that we will be in Sinai. He said, I quote what he said, we will not drown in the sands of Sinai. And we will build up a base of resistance in Sinai. And as for what you mentioned now, we know for certain that the military leadership of Hamas, Sinwar and Muhammad Def and Marwan Issa, they are surrounding themselves now where they are hiding with a belt of at least 30 to 40 Israeli hostages and using them as human shields because they are afraid that the Israeli army will kill them. So now they are trying to use them as human shield. And if they will escape, of course, they will take these hostages with them, so they will have this shield while they are escaping into Sinai.
To what extent, Yoni, do you believe that the Egyptians are willing to accept that type of an option? We've seen that the Egyptians have been entirely unwilling to accept even one Gazan refugee into the Sinai Peninsula or into Egypt. But it seems that the movement through the tunnels and via the tunnels and under the tunnels has really continued on without any type of interruption, really. We haven't really seen any reports of massive Egyptian activity on the Egyptian side of Rafah, destroying tunnels as they have done in the past. How much do you think that the Egyptians are really willing to tolerate a situation where the Hamas leadership, the Hamas military capabilities is now transferred from Gaza into Egypt and really creating an all-new type of nightmare for the Egyptians even there? Is that something which you think the Egyptians would be willing to accept? And if not, what would they do in order to stop it?
The Egyptians, unfortunately, they are playing a double game. I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, he traveled to Egypt, and he asked the head of the Egyptian intelligence, Abbas Kamel, General Abbas Kamel, he asked them to try and stop this smuggling movement using the tunnels underneath the Philadelphia corridor. And what did he hear? What did he hear from Abbas Kamel? He heard that he's wrong. There is no tunnels. The Egyptians deny that there are any tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor. And they told Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, what are you talking about? We destroyed these tunnels a few years ago. So they are playing a double game. And I think that if the Hamas leadership will try to escape through these tunnels into Egypt with the hostages, the Egyptians will ignore it, and they say they don't know anything about it and just let them pass, because Egypt is very afraid that Hamas will resume terror activities inside Egypt. Up till 2017, Hamas in Gaza, the military wing of Hamas, was cooperating with ISIS in Sinai, and they were carrying out attacks against the Egyptian army. And the famous terror attack that they committed was the assassination of the Egyptian general prosecutor, Hisham Barakat. This was a joint operation of Hamas and ISIS. So the Egyptians, as a retaliation, they closed the Rafah crossing for about a year. And then when Yahya Sinwar was elected as the leader of Hamas in Gaza, the Egyptian intelligence made a deal with Yahya Sinwar that they stop terror activities in Egypt, and in return, Egypt will open the Rafah crossing.
Now, I mean, it's incredible to hear and to even entertain the idea that there are no tunnels from Egypt into Gaza. We know that some of the weapons that were used by the terrorists during the assault were from North Korea. The IDF said very clearly that many of those weapons had been smuggled in via the tunnels from Egypt. And so it's incredible to hear that Egypt is so categorically denying their existence. It's hard to understand. You have on the one hand,
it's not hard to understand, because if they admit that there are tunnels, that means that they screwed up the situation. They did not fulfill their commitments to stop the smuggling. So instead of admitting their failure, they just denied. They said there's no tunnels. What are you talking about?
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's hard to understand really the barefaced gall of the Egyptians, since they know that there are tunnels. There was the whole deal in 2018, as you described, for regularization of the tax system, of the transfer of goods, overground, underground. Everybody knows about it. It was written about in the press. And so the fact that the Egyptians can now deny the existence, categorically deny the existence of the tunnels, is really quite unbelievable, and really shows the fact that we already know that we can't rely on Qatar. They're playing a double game. On the one hand, trying to be the legitimate power broker. On the other hand, constantly supporting Hamas. You have the same with Egypt, trying to be the legitimate, not supporting terror country. And yet, at the same time, they are always there helping Hamas, facilitating Hamas, allowing the transfer of weapons and all types of other goods into the Gaza Strip from Egypt. A complicated situation for all accounts. Yoni, thank you very much for joining us today. We will be back with you tomorrow again at 4 o'clock Israel time. Nice to see you again. Have a good week, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are.